What becomes possible when you stop trying to prove yourself and start building something that reflects who you really are? This is the Your Next Success podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Carolyn Sangal. I'm a life-first career coach and strategist on a mission to normalize questioning your career. Because I believe each of us is made on purpose for a purpose only we can fulfill. The longer we live out of alignment with who we are, what we do best, and why we're here, the more we miss out, and the more the world misses out on what only we can give. The Your Next Success podcast is where we explore how to build a career that truly fuels your life. We talk about self-discovery, smart job search strategies, professional growth, and you'll hear stories from people who've navigated big career transitions themselves. So you can see what it's really like to make bold changes and feel inspired to create your own version of authentic success. One that is aligned, meaningful, and truly yours. Today's guest is Dr. Jeffrey Kiplinger, a scientist turned entrepreneur whose journey includes corporate highs, identity shifts, and a deep commitment to reinvention. Jeff began his career in drug development at Pfizer, where he and his team worked to make analytical technologies more accessible to R&D teams. After a decade, he was let go, a pivotal moment that pushed him to redefine success and rebuild on his own terms. Since then, Jeff has demonstrated what's possible with clarity, resilience, and a willingness to keep trying. He founded and sold Averica Discovery, authored the Amazon best-selling book Expert to Entrepreneur, and co-founded Selling Science, a firm helping science-based businesses grow through smart sales strategy and communication. In this conversation, Jeff and I talk about what it's like to go from directionless high schooler to PhD chemist, the emotional weight of being let go, and how it affected his identity and relationships, how he kept moving forward even through economic downturns and uncertainty, why building a business takes more than expertise, and what scientists often overlook, the surprising lessons he learned about communication, sales, and redefining success. This episode is for anyone who's navigating career disruption, rebuilding after a setback, or feeling called to use their expertise in a new way. Jeff, welcome to Your Next Success. I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today. How's everything going for you?
Oh, it's great up here. We have 95 degrees and 110 degree heat index, and we're just enjoying the heck out of it.
Where are you located these days?
Hudson River Valley.
I'm glad that we got to meet several months ago. What I'm trying to do on our podcast is to try to help people understand different career transition. Folks can look at someone in the position that they have and they don't understand the roller coaster. And sometimes it's tricky to understand how people can make big changes and do things like that. So if you wouldn't mind, I would love to try to understand your career story. If we dialed it way back in the day when you were trying to decide what you wanted to go to college for, how did you make that decision? How did that happen for you?
I love this subject because I think life is full of so many different career transitions in a way. I don't know that my journey is any different than anybody else's. When I graduated high school, I was looking at myself as I had no direction. I didn't know what I was going to do next. And as a matter of fact, I applied to one college because my parents told me that if I didn't apply to a college, they were going to throw me out of the house. So I applied to one. I applied in July and went in September. I don't know that anybody could get away with that nowadays, but I applied to Butler University, and my parents were both alums, and maybe they pulled some strings to get my application considered late. But, I was a very rebellious kid at that age. When I hit college, I caught fire. So that was a whole new experience for me. I had just been slogging through high school. It was dull. It was difficult. It was very routine. But when I got to college, everything became possible, and I ate it up. I ended up with a triple major when I graduated.
Now, what were your majors? When you had your triple major, what were those subject fields? And then what were you looking at for grad school?
Chemistry, physics, and
Oh, cool.
zoology. But it was all sciences, right? And, I really loved college. But when graduate school, I had no self-discipline for basically being responsible for my own education. And it took me, I would say, a year and a half to develop even a good idea that I could succeed in graduate school. And during that period of time, I didn't really know that I was going to make it. Graduate school in chemistry, which was the major that I eventually chose, organic chemistry. If you were unsuccessful, you were awarded a master's degree if you'd made it so far during the program. And a master's degree was considered, by PhD candidates to be a second best.
Consolation prize.
We're basically asking you to leave. So,
Although there were a couple people that chose that up front. But then I always thought, do they know that there's this perception that we're all looking at them like they didn't choose the hard thing, but they just chose what was best for them, I guess.
hit the nail on the head there when you use perception, right? Because what we're taught in educational institutions is what the faculty wants you to believe about yourself and about the educational process. So I was taught a lot of things in graduate school. I was taught that going to work in industry was a lower status position than going to work in academia, and that if you weren't any good, ended up in industry instead of in another university someplace. And I've learned that's complete garbage. And although I'm sure there are still people in academia that believe that, and more power to them if they're successful. But it is very difficult to get an academic position, and it is relatively straightforward to get an industry position. And it ought to be about whether you're happy and whether you achieve what you wanted to do with that position rather than somebody's external rating of whether you're successful or not. So I had all of that head trash. Am I going to be able to develop the self-discipline necessary? Am I going to make it past that cutoff where you're told to leave with a master's? Am I going to make it into the glorified academic world, or am I going to end up a low-status person in industry? And eventually I started to realize I needed to make my own choices. And so as I did develop the self-discipline necessary to succeed, as I realized I was going to be able to get a PhD, that I was going to be able to write up a good, solid dissertation, and that I did all of that on my own, I began to feel that I could be more self-directing in my career. And I went for a couple of postdocs, muddled through those, found a nice position with Pfizer, started my career there, and then ultimately, same head trash. Are you going management? Management is where the success track is. Are you going to become a top scientist with the locations under your belt? Are you going to succeed in the corporate world, which is very political and very much dominated by, one-upmanship and some environments? All of those things kind of set me back a little bit at times too. And ultimately, when I left Pfizer, and I was fired from Pfizer, came into conflict after 10 years with my management, and they told me that I wasn't welcome anymore. And I received a nice little settlement package, and I went off and moped for a couple of years and tried to get new things going. And then we hit recessions. My efforts to start my own businesses were, coming up against headwinds that I had no control over. And again, during this whole process, you just learn that, you have to set your sail in some direction and try and identify the headwinds and see if there's a way past them. And if there's not, step back, try again.
For someone that had, kind of risen and overcome and the triple major and then getting the PhD and even landing the job at Pfizer, and then after 10 years to get that, no, we don't want you.
Yeah, it hurts. It hurts.
Like, were you pissed? Was it a hit to your ego? Was it an identity crash? Did you think trying your own business was a consolation prize? Like, what, walk me through that headspace and then how you got out of it.
So I did try to start businesses. My first one was a single member consultancy, like a lot of people who leave an industrial position do. My second one was a partnership with a gentleman where we were building research parks across the U.S., and we did 2 or 3 of those, and then he actually found a much better career path for himself. He managed to win the Powerball, as a matter of fact. So, he started a very different type of business and moved to Hawaii, and we disbanded that. I started a laboratory for a Midwestern company that was a technology collaboration between them and another group, and we rode that for a while until we hit the 2001 recession. So, there were some things that you could look at as false starts, but they were all learning experiences. And when I eventually started a contract research laboratory in the Boston area, I had to figure out how to make that successful. So we went operational with that on January 1st of 2008. You'll probably remember that Lehman Brothers went under in October of 2008. And that was the start of a long period of recession. I remember meeting with a bunch of executives in Boston as part of a peer networking group that I was involved in, and they all thought the world was going to collapse and it was never going to come back. That was early 2009. It was a scary time, but every year was an up year for us because we figured out how to manage for cash flow instead of trying to manage the P&L. And there was a lot of learning to do for me and for my upper-level employees who became executives in the company. And then we eventually rode that track record to a pretty good level of success and sold the company in 2016.
So you started that company just like yourself or you and a friend, and then grew it to how many people and then sold it?
I started it myself, and at the end, I had awarded some amount of stock to a few key employees, but I was the only majority owner, so it was really my baby. But we were, at the time that we sold, about 20 employees and low single $1 million figures, not into the tens of millions yet. I sold the company primarily because the buyer, which was a Canadian-based company, had a U.S. expansion plan that revolved around acquiring other assets in the United States, and I very much wanted to learn how to evaluate the value of other businesses. And so I worked with that team for about 8 or 9 months, and then their private equity owners made a change in the management structure, and I was sort of pushed to the side, and the rest of the team was let go, and they went a new direction. So when my contract was up, I left. Now, that's not an unusual situation. That's not anything that I tried to control or felt bad about not being able to control. That's just the vicissitudes of life, right? Things go and things come and change, and you ride it out. I think the earlier transitions that we were talking about through college and graduate school and first job and so forth were much more things that I let emotionally impact me.
Tell me about that and describe that a little bit more, because there could be some people at that. So what do you mean by that you let them emotionally impact you?
Well, I would say the worst one was leaving Pfizer, right? Because everybody knew that I'd left under conflict. People didn't know the details of the arrangement that I had with the company when I left and the settlement package and so forth. But what they did know was that I was pushed out. And most of my friends, I was living in southeastern Connecticut, right? Suburban or exurban or almost rural in a way. And so everybody's spread out, across that area. Everybody that I knew was a Pfizer person. And so my ex-wife and I would go to dinner with these people, and, there'd be some amount of uncomfortableness of talking about Pfizer around me and so forth. So eventually it did affect my marriage, and I think that might have been, to a large degree, in my head, that I felt inadequate in providing my share of the marriage. And so I was driven to start the company in Boston because of that. But it took several years, as I said, of false starts, some of which were because I didn't know enough, and some of which were because, things happen. So nobody predicts that their business partner is going to win the Powerball.
Right. Although, could you predict that I would win it? Can we win it together? I think we should buy a ticket and see.
Can't win if you don't play, Carolyn.
I know, that is the thing. That's always yeah, you didn't get the winning lottery ticket because you didn't buy it at all. So
again, all of that came around being let go from Pfizer, having to be around Pfizer people, not being able to get back into that world, wondering at the end of every discussion what my wife's thinking of me and so forth, eventually kind of put me in a pretty bad place. And I see people leaving Pfizer today because they're still doing rounds of layoffs, every major pharmaceutical company, and they're bitter. And what I wish for them is that they don't remain bitter for very long.
yes.
You put your life into a company like Pfizer, you think that they love you back, and they don't necessarily. Everything's a business decision. So, trying to personalize it and think that it's about you was really my mistake.
I did the same, honestly, because it felt like I was laid off in that 2009 kind of upheaval, and it was a hit to the ego, hit to the identity. And I was, originally thinking, like, seriously, like, I'm on the list. Like, don't you know who I am? Don't you know what I've done? How in the world did you put me on the list? And I felt like naively, before it happened to me, I admit I thought anyone who had ever been laid off or let go did something wrong and they must be a horrible person. And then, I was thinking, well, wait, am I the loser? I must be the loser because that person stayed and that person stayed and I didn't think highly of them and they still had jobs, but I didn't. So it was a huge, huge thing. Now, in hindsight, I can look back and I say, thank God that happened to me. Seriously, I'm so glad that happened to me because what I've been able to do since that time is leaps and bounds better and more suited to who I actually am than if I had stayed there. But I naively thought, oh, I'm going to join this company. I'm going to stay for 40 years and this, and that's just how it's going to go down. So had you thought that originally as well when you kind of joined Pfizer thinking I'm going to stay there forever?
I not only thought that, I was told that. When I interviewed for the position at Pfizer, I remember going out for a walk at lunch on the campus with my soon-to-be boss, who told me that basically Pfizer had a policy that if you made it through your first 6 months, you were an employee for life. So he said, understand that when you join this company, you're joining for your entire career. Now, believing that was my mistake. I remember when Pfizer did its first layoff, and this was prior to the mergers with Warner Lambert and then later Park Davis. So they weren't expanding at that point into the behemoth that they later became. But I remember the first layoff that came down just shocked everyone in the company. They eliminated an entire research area, and nobody was familiar with that ever happening. So, yeah, and there are still people, as I say, that are going through layoffs now that are shocked and, and clearly emotionally coping with something that they never expected to happen. Because the attitude is, I've put all of my energy into this. Right? We can say pharmaceutical companies are evil all we want, right? But the reality is that every single person that goes to work in those companies every day wants to do something good. And they believe that by the slow incremental process of science, that they will make a contribution to human health. Sometimes it'll be a very visible contribution, like they'll have their name on a patent for a brand new drug that's a big impact on humanity. But more often, it's just that you're supporting teams that are doing that type of work. And you feel like, I've put all my energy into this. I've been at work, 50 hours or more a week for years and years and years dedicated to this company. And they just basically say, well, you're a line item.
Yeah. So then you decided you wanted to be in control of your own destiny, had your own companies. And after you sold that, then what did you do?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. So I did have to ride out the last of my contract. And I did some griping to people around me about that, but I didn't personalize it the way that I did with the Pfizer thing or, with my struggles to develop the discipline necessary to get through graduate school. I didn't feel like, oh, Jeff, you're inadequate, oh, Jeff, you failed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was just, I wish it had turned out differently and, gripe about it. Ultimately, I didn't linger on the fact that it didn't work out. I had made some money from selling the company. I felt that I could retire if I really wanted to. I told my wife that I would take a year off after I left at the end of my contract, and I did so. So I left at the end of 2018. Taking a year off brought me to the end of 2019. We all know what happened at the beginning of 2020. So, I have perfect timing with respect to these kind of things. But what I found during that year that I took off was that every single thing looked like a business to me. I mean, there was a clam shack that went out of business near us, and I was like, I could buy that, or I could turn it into a place that made high-end donuts, and, they would sell by 9:30 in the morning, and then I could take the rest of the day off.
Yeah.
We could create a native plant nursery. There's a real need for that out here. I could start a business in photography. I don't know.
So this entrepreneurial spirit was a huge driver, and it didn't necessarily matter what form.
It didn't. No, I really enjoyed after the cycle of starting my last company and selling it successfully. I enjoyed that in hindsight. It was a struggle at times. I mean, we had to get through that 2008 to 2010 recession period, the really worst of it, not knowing whether we were going to survive or not. And that weighs on you psychologically and keeps you up at night, and it's a tough time. A lot of entrepreneurs that have been through that, as some of them I wrote about in the book. I got quotes from people who talked about how it affected their physical health to make it through that period of time.
Imagine what your life would be like if your career aligned with who you are, what you do best, and actually fueled the life you want. At Next Success, we support all ages and stages through career transitions, from students exploring majors or careers to job seekers actively searching or reimagining their next move to professionals committed to self-awareness and leadership growth. Stay connected and explore what's possible at nextsuccesscareers.com and follow Next Success Method on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. And let's talk about that book, because you have become a best-selling author, to add to your accolades, and your book is Expert to Entrepreneur.
Well, initially that was a COVID project, right? So, here I was after taking a year off and then deciding to start a company that, with my business partner, that was going to help CROs and contract development firms sell better to their scientist customers, right? So we were just launching that when COVID hit. And then I had nothing to do for a while. So I thought, well, before I forget this whole process of founding, growing, and selling a contract research firm, why don't I write it all down and then float it around to a few people and see whether it reads well? So I did just that. I'd never published a book before. I wrote something that ultimately was a fairly personal account and looked to me like it could be valuable to other scientists who are in a similar position of trying to test their entrepreneurial skills, trying to learn through that process. And so I wrote Expert to Entrepreneur, and I found a publisher, and the book came out 2021, I guess, so about 2 years after I started writing it, and became an Amazon bestseller, and that's been a nice little bonus to see that something you've written is useful to people and gets good feedback from people.
So did you write what you wish somebody had told you?
Not so much. I wrote what I experienced and how I learned how to do it better. I don't know that there's another book out there that deals specifically with the struggles that scientists have with, part of it is our own head trash. I remember learning in 7th grade in earth science class that you had to write down everything as though it was completely impartial. And so in 7th grade, I learned to write in passive voice instead of in active voice. So instead of I did this, the stuff was added to the stuff and this was observed, and so you become so hyper objective that you fail to develop the skills to say what you believe. And this was the biggest struggle that myself and my team members faced in selling what we knew we were good at to a customer.
So then how did you develop those skills?
I took a sales training class with, a team of sales experts in the Metro West Boston area. And initially I struggled. I pushed back against everything they said. No, I can't do it that way because my customers are scientists. They're different. They don't expect to hear things that way. They expect me to stand there and say totally objectively, this is what we do. You should evaluate it and decide whether you want to buy from me. And that doesn't work very well. I'm basically forcing my client to make a decision that they don't have sufficient information to evaluate.
And then how did it evolve then?
Well, eventually I learned that, if we believe that what we were doing brought something to the table, we should talk about that. This is why we do what we do. This is what we believe it brings to you. And then immediately drop all of that stuff about us and start asking questions to see whether we can determine if we're a good fit for the customer's problem. It's a different approach from standing up at a scientific conference and presenting a paper where you objectively display all of the data and you say, these are our conclusions, but your conclusions may be different. Please take this work and bridge forward from there. That objective way of presenting is what we're all taught, but it doesn't work when you're talking to a customer where you have to evaluate what are they thinking about the impact of the problem that they're having. Does it impact the organization enough for them to spend money on fixing it? What are their other solutions that they've looked at in the past? What are those? And those could include another contract firm. It could include another research path that we don't have any impact on. It could include buying a piece of equipment that we don't have in our laboratory. In those cases, I have to be willing to say, that might be a better solution for you. But
I see. Because as scientists, we're objective and we're just skeptical. So it's always like, let me find the hole in this thing. That can't be true. That can't be right. I think it's better. And then to flip to the sales, it's here's how we solve your problem. Here's how we can work together, being the bridge from your past to their future.
And that's exactly what you face when you go into a room full of scientists. If you present, they will find holes. That is their job. That is what they've been trained to do. As you've said, that is their skill. And we all recognize that in each other. So if I'm presenting, if I'm just talking about myself, all I'm doing is presenting an argument for them to poke holes in. And at the end of the day, they'll come out of that seminar or whatever I've given, and they'll feel good about themselves because they did their job as scientists. They poked holes in it. But we won't have a business relationship, so it doesn't do either of us any good. I can't solve their problem, and they can't pay me for doing so.
Yeah, so interesting. How has your definition of success changed over time?
Well, my definition of success at a personal level, I think everybody's a little different in this, right? So when people talk about successful entrepreneurs, a lot of times in the books that you read, in the seminars that you can subscribe to online of business experts telling you how to do this correctly, you'll hear people basically saying, if you're not motivated by money, you will not make money. And so I find that for myself, I'm not motivated by money so much as I am a highly competitive person and I like to win. Now, if my measure of winning is money, that brings me to one point. If my measure of winning is at the end of the day, I'm really, really happy, that's another thing. So I was very, very happy about the path that we took with Averica. If I'd been money motivated, in hindsight, I should be beating myself up because I should have ridden it for longer to make us more profitable and then sold it for a higher sum. Then I'd be, sitting at least on a small yacht someplace in the Mediterranean. But that wasn't the path I took. I took the path towards something that was exciting to me.
Yeah.
Working with a company in Canada that was a buyer was exciting to me at the time. And I'm still good friends with the team that I sold the company to. I don't have a business relationship with what that company became when their private equity changed the direction, but that's okay.
How about outside of work? What have been the things that were always your go-tos of trying to have a sense of fulfillment or utilizing all of you? Because sometimes as scientists, if you're good in music, you could be good in math and science and all of these things. But like, what have been your other well-rounded hobbies to use all of your skills besides just the science ones that were your career?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, in terms of hobbies, I do a lot of cycling and hiking. I find that's physically challenging, and it's about self-discipline, like I learned in graduate school that, what can I make myself into if I put my mind to it? So that's got that aspect of it. I play guitar badly, and my focus has been on bluegrass music, where I'm trying to get to the point where I can start a small bluegrass band and begin to get gigs. I sing pretty well, so that's my forte in bluegrass. And I have a nice high tenor voice, and everybody seems to enjoy that. So that's been a skill that I've been working to develop. Really, the big passion project that my wife and I have is we own 10 acres of land up here in the Hudson River Valley. When we bought it, it was a depleted dairy farm, very bad soil structure, tons of invasive plants. The only wildlife that seemed to thrive were deer who used it for shelter. So we have a tremendous deer overpopulation problem up here. And so we've been working for about 8 years now to restore it, with the idea being with the marker of successful restoration being biodiversity. And so I look at insect and bird species counts as a way
Oh, wow.
so I can't identify the ones that you only hear the bird song and then some expert says, oh, that's a Blackburnian warbler or something like that. I can't do that. So I have to see them. So I've seen 85 just from my back porch, and we've got about 30 nesting species now. So this is pretty exciting. It's a passion project, and it's one that we've started to do more. We've started to go the route of trying to expose it to more people up here, because there's a lot of interest in doing this type of rewilding work, if you will.
Maybe that's another book.
It might be. There's a lot of people writing about this, and I don't feel competent, but I do have in mind to produce maybe a 15-minute little video about the project and see if we can use that to get even more people interested.
Absolutely. That is so amazing. So if somebody feels stuck or stagnant in their career, in their life, what's your go-to advice for them?
The first thing I would say is, if your emotional response is to beat yourself up, please take a step back, because every time that I've done that, I've ultimately, as time has gone on and as I've aged and as I've learned more and as I've been successful at other things, I've learned to look back on those periods of time and say, really, the beating myself up part was holding me back. What I needed to do was to say, okay, here was something I failed at. Here was something that I didn't control for. Here was something that I didn't learn. And I have the opportunity to do that now, or I have the opportunity to do something different. So, I can't say that I would take the Pfizer experience and learn to become more successful at corporate politics. Not my thing, not my interest, but also not my fault that I wasn't.
Right.
Because I had interest in other things. They just didn't fit with that part of the Pfizer organization at that time.
That's a good point. So how can people find you? What capacities do you work with people? How can they find you these days?
I consult with a few companies that are trying to get a business forward look at how they might bring their science to other people. So part of that is helping them understand that they can build a sales organization, that they can bridge forward from their marketing team to better exposure and then sell based on what they're good at. And part of it is just the satisfaction of working with the executive leadership of a company that hasn't got it all in place yet. There's a certain coaching aspect to that, but it's, really try and get in and get my hands dirty and build people's organizations to a better level of success. I like it to be metrics-based. I am, after all, a scientist. And, I like to have goals that we're working towards. In terms of exposure to the basic ideas, the book is a good place to start. It is widely available on Amazon. It's called Expert Entrepreneur, How to Turn Your Hard-Won Expertise into a Thriving Business. But if they search Expert Entrepreneur and Kiplinger and Amazon, they'll find me. The company Selling Science that I founded with my business partner, Dave Koyevsky, we still work with companies on their business process. So people can find me at jeff@selling-science.com.
Awesome. And I am big on trying to help people be authentically successful. So how would you define authentic success for you in this chapter?
Again, I think for me, the big struggle personally has always been getting out of my own head and being able to look at how I've affected other people along the way. Some of that's been good, some of that's bad. What I'm looking for now in the rest of my life is the sum of things ends up being, net positive. So everything that I do with my family, I have a daughter who is getting married soon. She and her fiance, they're just starting out. I put a lot of energy into that. We put a lot of energy into the future of the land up here and the people that touches. So we're trying to percolate that outward. I love to sing, and I find that's a way of building community with other people as well.
Well, thank you so very much for giving a little bit of insight into your career journey, into your past, into your amazing book, and how you help others. And certainly wish you all the best with the wedding, the future, the rewilding project, and all of the things. I appreciate you for being part of your next success.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always wonderful to talk to you, Caroline, and I think your business is fantastic. Having gone through these kind of struggles, I think they're ubiquitous, right? We're all going to go through things like this. And having some help in that along the way to reset my own head would have been invaluable. I would have lost less time, had fewer periods of being unhappy, and ultimately I hope would have ended up where I am now much more quickly.
Well, thank you so very much. Jeff's story is a reminder that success isn't about sticking to the original plan. It's about staying curious, learning through each challenge, and moving forward with intention. He didn't set out to become an entrepreneur. He was fired from a job he thought would last a lifetime. And yet what he built after speaks volumes, not just about business, but about courage and clarity. Thanks for listening to Your Next Success with Dr. Carolyn Sangal. Remember, authentic success is yours to define and includes aligning your career to support the life you want.